Well, welcome back. This is the third night in the creation versus evolution crash course. And we've already covered the first two nights. We looked at design and biology the first night. And then last night we looked at the fossil record. And tonight we're going to look at the flood. Just quick review. Genesis 1 and 2 talks about creation, the way that God created, how he created things. It tells us in Genesis he did it all in 6 days. And then in early part of Genesis 2 that he rested on the seventh day. In science, we see design in nature as being so important, and that comes from the Genesis creation. But then we see something happen to God's good creation, and Genesis 3 to 5, we read about the fall and the entrance of death and suffering and disease and all that kind of thing into the world, pain and broken relationships. We see that coming in, and we see that this good earth that God created becomes not quite so good anymore. And then as we see, wickedness increases until it says violence and wickedness filled the earth. And Genesis 6 through 8 shows how God brought about the flood in order to cleanse this earth and to preserve it, really, so that life could go on. If it had gone on the way it was, there probably would have been no human life left on the earth. And so God cleansed the earth through the flood. And as we look at science, we see evidence all over the world. And I like what Ken Ham says, billions of dead things buried in rock layers, laid down by water all over the earth. And that's exactly what we see, isn't it? And so we see evidence of the flood, both in the rock layers themselves. There's evidence that they were laid down primarily under moving water, or sometimes not so fast. But we see evidence of watery destruction, and then we see major evidences of erosion after the flood. And then probably an ice age sometime between these two, maybe a little bit after Babel. It depends on where you put those time frames. But Genesis 9 through 11 then talks about the dispersion. And in there we look at things like the origin of the various skin colorations, often called races. We really believe there's only one race. It's the human race. We all came from the same ancestry, from Adam and Eve. And so we can look at that. And so we see evidence of this dispersion. And you can look at the distribution of animals around the earth. You can look at the origin of the languages. One of the guys that was in our Costa Rica training group, he is a professional translator, and he did a program for us on the origin of languages, and then he compared the traditional secular view with the biblical point of view. And the biblical view fits the evidence as far as what we see in the world today with languages. And so that's the foundation. And that's the foundation biblically. And also, I believe, as we understand this foundation, we're going to have a much better understanding also of science. Really, this gives you a really good framework for understanding the science that we see in the world around us. Helps us to know why in the world we've got DNA and protein synthesis and all this, which is very close to my mind right now, seeing as how I'm teaching it right now. But just so much that we see in the world, and this obviously with the flood fits better with the geologic evidence, although there are some biological things come in there too. And so we can see science and the Bible fitting together. Now, we are not trying to prove the Bible by science. That's not our goal. We are looking at how science and the Bible fit very well hand in hand when we're looking at an interpretation that is open to understanding this world from a biblical viewpoint, and not only through that secular viewpoint that we get everywhere else. So that's the foundation that we have. Tonight, Dave is going to be looking at Genesis 6 through 8. And that makes me want to go hike, Dave.
I'll bet it does. That's one of our groups.
Yep.
We were
We were
leading.
we were really blessed and privileged to work with the Institute for Creation Research many years ago, and lead some of their backpacking tours in the Grand Canyon. Those were phenomenal tours, and really loved it. They were like 5 days, sometimes
Yep.
6 nights, or 6 days even, in the canyon, and wonderful memories from those times. So
And then we also led it when the Bible College was going down there. We've led
yes, that's
also
right.
trips partway into the Grand Canyon.
Right. So I remember when I very first time Dave and I went to the Grand Canyon together, I stood on the edge and I said, someday I want to walk to the bottom of this canyon. And Dave says, why? I didn't move anything. I didn't lose anything down there. But I think I won him over because he was willing to come along, and he loved it too as we really got into the backpack trips.
Yeah, I didn't
But
like
we're
it
not.
because I couldn't find a rock to pick up and save.
Yeah,
It's a
right.
national park. You can't do that.
Nope, you can't do that. So
But
we're going to
when you're looking down into the canyon, you realize it's a big hole in the ground. And when you're at the
you
very bottom looking up, you wonder, am I ever going to make it out?
know, you go one step at a time. You
Exactly.
just know the prayer of the tired hiker. It goes, you pick them up, Lord, I'll put them down. One step at a time, all the way on up. So anyway, if you're interested in Grand Canyon tours or so on, we can give you some good recommendations there too. There's people you could go with, or we could put together a trip for you.
Yep, some of our own staff will do that.
Yeah, I think our younger staff would be happy to backpack in
Oh
there.
boy, they'd jump at the chance.
At
And
this
then,
point, I'm not interested in doing backpacking in there, but what I would love to do is go down to the bottom and, without backpacks, and stay at Bright Angel Lodge down at the bottom for a couple of nights and do some exploring. And then those that want could ride mules back up, and those that wanted to hike could. So I still have that in my bucket list, Dave.
it takes about 2 to 3 years of advanced planning to do something at Phantom Ranch
I
frequently.
guess I better get planning.
You better.
All righty. Take
All
it over,
right,
Dave.
so we're going to look at that. We can subtitle this program Noah's Flood, Fiction or Reality? And we're going to look at some of the evidences of that tonight. And so as we look at it, we're going to look at the Bible, the archaeology and geology, cultural stuff, and that's all part of the evidence for the flood. I had a school of mine student when we were talking about creation evolution said, "You don't believe in Noah and the flood, do you?" I said, "Sure, don't you?" He said, "How did Noah fit all those stinking animals on board that little tiny boat?" And I asked him, "What's the size of the boat?" He didn't know. I said, "How many animals couldn't fit on board?" He didn't know. So I said, "What you're trying to tell me is that an unknown number of animals can't fit on board a boat of unknown size." And some of the students began to chuckle at this guy. He didn't realize the fallacy of his argument. So how did Noah get all those? It's the first thing to understand is that boat was not that little tiny vessel that you see in cartoons or even in the church nursery on the walls. It wasn't that. It was actually 300 cubits long, which makes that boat at least 1.5 to 2 American football fields in length. That's a big boat, okay? Huge. Anyhow, it turns out when you get by that one of the most documented biblical events happens to be the flood. And not only is referred to in many chapters of the Bible, the New Testament authors accepted it. Even Jesus accepted it as a fact. So it's important to understand if it's good enough for Jesus, it might be good enough for us, huh? So anyhow, some of the archaeological evidence that we're going to look at here. First of all, Sumerian king list. That particular list is you can find in some of the archaeological discoveries. It names kings who reigned for long periods of time. Then a great flood came, And after that flood, Sumerian kings ruled for much shorter periods of time. That is significant from the standpoint when you look at the biblical record, the ancient patriarchs lived very long ages. Then the flood came. After the flood, our patriarchs and the people afterwards really did not live extremely long ages. So that kind of fits what the Sumerian king list would say. Babylonian documents, there's several of them, all describe the same flood. What I like is the Gilgamesh epic, the 11th tablet. It talks about an ark, animals taken on board the ark, birds sent out during the flood, ark landed on a mountain, and a sacrifice was offered. If you know biblical text, you say, wait a minute, that's what it says in Genesis chapter 6 to 8, right? You can actually read it. And so some people say, well, maybe the Gilgamesh, the Bible was borrowed from the Gilgamesh epic. That's what they'll say. How come it's always the Bible being borrowed from something else? They think the Gilgamesh epic is older. However, what if, and this is what I'm thinking about, in the first parts of Genesis, you read things like, these are the generations of Adam. These are the generations of, then it gives a patriarch. And you see several different spots where it says that. And it's almost as if it says, these are the records that were kept by Noah. These are the records that were kept by this patriarch. In which case, those were first, and then the Gilgamesh epic would have borrowed from the Bible. And I really believe if Noah and if all the older patriarchs could live to be around 900 or more years, then they walked and talked with God. They probably had a language. They probably were writing things down, and they're not primitive people at all. They're walking and talking with God. And so when I look at the various things, I say these other cultures borrowed from the biblical record instead. And by the way, there is a problem with the Gilgamesh Ark. It's shaped like a cube. How would you like to ride on rough sea waters for a year in something bobbing in a cube and turning back and forth all around? I don't think you would. Other ones have the ark shaped like a tin can. Boy, that sounds like a big old squirrel cage for the whole 1 year. But the thing is, there's something about Noah's account that stands up above all of the flood legends from around the world. Now, there are 270 flood legends, and they have boats of safety, people going on board, many of them having animals going on board. In fact, even the ancient Chinese language, the word for boat happens to be made up of smaller pictures. 8 mouths in a vessel. How did they get that for a boat? How many people were on board the Noah's Ark, according to God's word? Turns out 8 and the vessel. Is that coincidental? Not really, because other words too, in the Chinese script, you find out, like the one somebody's going to deceive you. Some of those pictures would be a woman and a garden and a snake. Not coincidental. And there is a book called Discovery of Genesis in the Chinese language, how they go word after word after word. Some of the ancient documents go right back to the biblical record. All right. There's a new book out. It's called Echoes of Ararat. And actually, it has even more flood accounts just in the Americas. And there are over 300 accounts of the flood that are similar to what you might read in the biblical record. All right. The thing about it is Noah's detail. I call it Noah's ship log because he is writing it down evidently as it is occurring. All right. For instance, it says in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on the same day, all the fountains of the great deep burst open, and the floodgates of the sky were opened. Look at that detail. 2 sources of water and specific day that the flood starts. Now, a lot of people say, oh, the Bible is just mythology. It's just a good fairy tale. But how do fairy tales start? Once upon a time in a far distant land, right? No, it's not detailed. This is detailed. And Noah's account continues. You find out exactly when the ark rounds on the mountain, specific day for that. And when the birds were sent out, you've got the day. And when the earth was dried up and Noah was told to leave the ark, that's over over a year that Noah was on that boat, and he's recording it evidently as he does it. And by the way, it wasn't just a little rain. The windows of heaven opened up, the fountains of the great deep burst open. You find out that we have 2 sources of the water, don't you? And and then with all that going on, there's going to be something very similar to catastrophic upheaval of the ocean basins. And so that's what we're looking at in the flood model, as seemed to be indicated by the scripture. And by the way, a lot of church colleges, secular people says, yeah, there probably was a flood, but it was just some local flood and they blew it up out of proportion. Okay. No, the biblical record says it was a global flood or worldwide flood. That's for sure. And why would I say that? Why have such a big boat that is up to 2 football fields in length for a local flood? They could just move out 100 miles. After all, Noah was building this thing for 100 years. And so they had plenty of time to move if it was a local flood. And so it's such a big ark. Why so big? Because God told him to take all those animals. And maybe even bigger because he was hoping, not God was hoping, God knows, but there was room for all kinds of people. There's no excuse. There wasn't room for me on the ark. There was plenty of room. When you look at the inclusive language of destruction, all flesh perish from under heaven. Boy, that's all over, isn't it? And that wasn't under or in the ark. So birds were taken on board the boat. Why take birds for a local event? They'd be better off definitely flying around outside. And so we see the birds on the ark indicating a worldwide flood. The water covers the tops of the tallest mountains. Now, if I cover the top of Mount Everest, what happens? Every part of the world is covered, correct? And so, sure. And this is where skeptics now that you're going to run into might throw something at you. It says, hey, wait a minute. We do not have enough water to cover the tops of the tallest mountains. There's not enough. We don't have enough water on planet Earth to cover Everest, that's for sure. Well, the first thing we note is the tops of the tallest mountains have sedimentary layers that contain fossils which once swam in the ocean. Now, that in itself is not proof for the flood. It just shows those mountains were underwater at one time. But secular geologists would say, oh, yeah, they just got pushed up over to its present position over millions and millions of years. Okay, see, we're looking at the same data through 2 different glasses, aren't we? And different worldviews. Okay, so how might I explain this? A couple of different ways. Number one, according to Psalm 104, it appears like it is at the very end of the flood. God said, the mountains rose up and the valleys sank down. So Everest and the high mountains were not as high as they are right now. And I can just imagine these mountains just pushing their way up in through the waters. Where did all the water go? Didn't have to go anywhere. It just had to stay the same spot. But then you have Marianas Trench. The valley sank down. That trench is 7 miles deep. It's going to hold a lot of water. And so when we look at it, that's a very good explanation found in Psalm 104 of how the mountains were covered. They weren't as high as they are today. And if you take a giant iron, mm, iron down all the mountains around the world, make the whole world kind of look like a soccer ball, you're going to find out there's enough water to cover the entire world by at least 1.5 miles deep of water. And by the way, recent uh, uh, studies have shown that there's a whole bunch more water on the mantle boundary, and it's in a specific mineral called dimwitty. And if you look at how much water is in there, it turns out that there's more water in that than in all the oceans in the world, just under continental United States. So we have plenty of water on planet Earth, okay? The very duration of the flood, Noah was on that ark 371 days. What does that mean? Local floods, you're over it in a couple of weeks, aren't you? No, this is a very different event, a year-long worldwide catastrophe. And the final thing is God sent the rainbow as a promise, never to send a flood like that again. We've had so many local floods, even in the last decade. And so God would not have kept his promise if it was just some kind of a local flood. And but I think no, it's a global flood. And by the way, there's much geologic evidence worldwide for that flood. And when I look at the canyons, I see a different picture. I see a different picture. Why? Because I'm willing to accept the flood. I'm willing to have a filter that allows me to look at it and maybe cancel out a lot of that evolutionary thinking that I grew up with and followed me all the way through my graduate training. And but at that point, I started saying, "Oh, is there another explanation?" At that point, I changed lenses, and I could see evidence for the flood all over. I'm going to give you some of that just from geology. This is Southern California in the Anza-Borrega Desert, and there you see a ridge that is about 600 feet tall, and it's a lot of rock in that ridge. But what's interesting about it is that this whole ridge is made up of water-worn boulders that look to have been rolled around in some kind of a stream bed or a huge river. And how big? Well, look at that one boulder in the center. That's the size of a large dump truck. You need an extremely deep and high velocity current to move boulders like that. Or this one, another spot in the same general area, you have layer after layer of these water-worn boulders layered out. But some of those boulders are about the size of the Jeep, or at least half the size. And again, high velocity, pulsating currents in order to explain something like this. Again, that fits the flood, does not fit anything in slow and gradual geologic processes whatsoever. In another spot, you see this black boulder material, rounded boulders, wedging its way into your formations on your right, kind of like a fist into a layer cake. Notice how the layers bend up and bend down to allow this fist to come in to the layer cake. That tells me those layers were still yet soft when that occurred. Otherwise, it'd been solid rock. This would never have happened. And it only takes hundreds of years to turn this type of sandstone material into solid rock. Okay, it doesn't take millions of years at all. So if it was still soft, it speaks of hundreds, maybe 1,000 years, not millions and millions of years. So we just eliminated almost 100 million years of geologic history right there. Mount St. Helens is a gorgeous place to go take a vacation at one time. All right. And Spirit Lake, a wonderful resort area. And then the mountain took up a bad habit. It began to smoke. It's not good when a mountain smokes, okay? But they noticed it quit smoking and the mountain began to bulge. It's not good when the mountain is bulging towards you. You need to run quickly. All right. Well, it finally, on May 18th, 1980, the third of the mountain slid away, and it turned out to get a great big, huge volcanic eruption. And that was May 18th, 1980. Okay. Again, we lost a lot of mountain that day, but we also gained a lot of information. For instance, where did all that material from the top go? Some of it blew a long ways away, but others settled below with new sedimentation right below. And then canyons were carved in the new sedimentation as well, that some of which had already turned into rock. All right. So we look at layers like that in geology, and we're usually taught it takes long periods of time for each layer, but that's not the case. What you have here is what is called pyroclastic flows. That means ash going up into the air. What goes up must come down, and it came down, boom, 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 like that, forming very fine layers in a very short period of time. And these hot volcanic particles welded them together into a solid layer. So layers don't take a long time. I've been at the Badlands. You know what they tell you there? They'll tell you that it takes millions of years to form those layers. But, sir, you might ask, didn't we see the same type of layers that were formed in the Mount St. Helens in one day or a few days? Your answer would likely be, well, Mount St. Helens is a special case. Well, maybe this is a special case too. And then the ranger would say, well, look at that erosion. You can't get that kind of erosion in a short period of time. That's called Badlands erosion. All of the different gullies and the channels, that takes a long time to form. Not really. Mount St. Helens, when it erupted, had secondary steam blasts. It produced steam pits with the same badland topography. How long did that take? Part of an afternoon. And this one is a quarter of a mile from the shortest distance across there. And so that happens on a pretty good size scale. So maybe the Badlands happen pretty rapidly too. And then canyon formation, we're told, takes millions and millions of years. But this canyon is not on the map. It goes for 8 miles back there. It's not on the map prior to 1980. And yet it's a very deep canyon. So how did that happen? Secondary activity after Mount St. Helens had basically melted the glaciers and snowfields, and all of that came rushing downstream, picking up particles, picking up rocks, carrying them down the Toutle River, and eventually filled some of those valleys down there. And that was such a thick deposit that was going downriver that is like a flowing cement. And there were tanker trucks actually floating on top of this dense material. You can understand the erosive ability of something like that to make canyons in a short period of time. Here's what Peter Frenzen says, a monument scientist. You'd expect a hard rock canyon to be thousands, even hundreds of thousands of years old, but this was cut in less than a decade. Doesn't take long. Actually, almost all of that was carved in one day. That's all it took. And so think about the floodwaters of Noah's day with all the world covered, not just a little bit of water. How much erosion can you get when you have the floodwaters, the whole world covered with water, nothing to stop the tsunamis and huge waves? You'll get canyons carved out pretty rapidly, won't you? You're going to get a lot of mixture of mud very rapidly. This is Bryce Canyon. Gorgeous place. We love taking students there too. And we want to make sure they hike down into that canyon. And wow, But you know, all of that is petrified mud. Here's a principle of geology. And when you use this principle, you can explain most of geological formations that you see around the country. And you find out when you see mud, think flood. See mud, think flood. And that's what we see there. Petrified mud, think flood. All right, go to the Colorado National Monument. Oh, sand mud, petrified, think flood. Of course, they say it was all wind deposited but instead of water deposited, but the evidence seems to point water deposition, think flood. Okay. In fact, when you look at that, they say it takes millions of years to carve that big canyon. Think this way too. Not only can the layers be put down pretty rapidly by water deposition, but the canyons can be carved quickly. In fact, I have evidence of it. You go to another spot in the Colorado National Monument, and you see a canyon within a canyon. All right. And what are you? Well, you're looking at a lot of flow at one time, and then more channelized flow carving that inner canyon. I just happen to live right down below there. Okay. So a wonderful place to live and study geology. That's for sure. Again, what do I see? I see lots of water. I think flood, don't I? And there's dry falls in eastern Washington. Dry falls. It's flat as a pancake out there. What do you mean a waterfall? How could that be? And that's what dry falls means. At one time, there's a huge amount of water stretching from horizon to horizon that might have been 300 to 700 feet deep, rolling over the top of that and carving out great big canyons. Now you say, how do you know that? Well, that was you might say they laughed at geologists who suggested that for a long period of time, but now it is standard geology, and that's what happened in the Pacific Northwest. There's an M on the side of the mountain right there. That's at Missoula, Montana. It shows you the water depth of at Missoula of an ancient lake, and you see the shorelines of that lake, and you see the shorelines over 1,000 feet higher than Missoula. And then you go downstream a little ways and you find there's an ice dam that would have been about 2,000 feet deep. And so this 2,000 feet lake was backed up behind this ice dam, and it covered a huge section of this part of the Northwest. And then there was another one, Glacial Lake, Columbia. And then this one is called Missoula Lake. And it would have, this, one of the bigger ones, would have carried or caught about 500 cubic miles of water. But since ice is not a good thing to make a dam out of, it's going to break. And when it breaks, it's going to break suddenly, and all that water's got to get discharged somewhere, and that'll be downstream. And I wouldn't want to be downstream when that particular lake broke. I can't run that fast. All right. And so it carved out a series of networks when this entire thing collapsed. There's a good picture of what the Missoula, Montana area, that part looks like, and the shorelines around it. That would have meant the lake would have drowned Missoula. But all of a sudden it broke, and a huge amount of water cascaded downstream. Horizon covered with water from as far as you can see, from the left to the right. And what that does is make a receding waterfall, and you find out you can get a canyon formed in as little as 24 to 48 hours. Did you catch that? The significance of that? That's a big canyon. It's 6 miles wide, up to 900 feet deep, 22 miles long. Within 24 to 48 hours? Yep. You can do it in one event. They sometimes say that the ice might have come back again, dammed up the river again, but we can probably explain it with one catastrophic water flow near the end of the glacial age. All right. Here's another spot of the same flood, the Missoula flood, Palouse Falls. It's a big falls, 180 feet high. A lot of water going down there, but look at the huge plunge pool below. What that tells you is that there at one time there's a lot more water going through there. So how much water? Look in the far distance. Notice how those hills are rounded. They're rounded by water. You see gravel deposits all over. And so the water depth was so high at one time, it would have catastrophically created this particular water flow. The canyon did not take millions of years, and it goes for many miles down to the Snake River Canyon. Again, standard geology. This could have easily been formed in as little as 24 to 48 hours. Look further downstream, you find the evidence of catastrophe. You find boulder fields down there of granite and a lot of basalt. And that's what you find upstream. And these boulders were carried down by that floodwaters. And if you were to drill down in that valley right there below that big boulder, you would probably find 200-300 feet of nothing but solid boulders washed out and deposited here. So when I see boulders, I think catastrophe. I really do. So when I see these boulders at Escalante, Utah, and I see that these boulders are on the top of the ridge, and there's a canyon on one side and a canyon on the other side, it tells me the water depth was above the size of that canyon. It's chewing out that canyon very rapidly, and you see the boulders on top. Again, boulders indicate catastrophic flooding. You go to Twin Falls, Idaho, you see another boulder pile, water-worn boulders. And where's the catastrophe? Well, there's our friend Diane right there, who also helps us lead Yellowstone tours, by the way. But anyhow, we see that big boulder there. And the whole area is like a potato field with huge boulders, some of which are the size of that Suburban. And so you say, whoa, high velocity water and very deep currents were necessary to lay those boulders and carry those and roll them around. And sure enough, you know where this spot is? Look at it and think about it. They didn't know where those boulders came from until they started associating those boulders with the shorelines near Salt Lake City, Utah. And you see a bench up here, and you see that bench right there. It is about 1,000 feet above the present level of the Great Salt Lake. That means there was a huge lake there at one time. It would have covered probably 1/3 of the state of Utah. And then that particular lake, this is standard geology now, collapsed in a great big flood and would have carved that Snake River Canyon in as little as 24 to 48 hours, or as the signpost said, less than 30 days. Okay, definitely less than 30 days, because dams don't fail slowly. They catastrophically fail. But again, look at that, Twin Falls, Idaho, Snake River, but look at that huge plunge pool. What is it telling you? A lot more water coming through. Where were those boulders? Up on top, right up there. And so again, lots of water flow, carving canyons in a very short period of time. All right. All right. You see the same thing around the world. In Siberia, you find there was a flood even bigger than the Missoula flood. They say 10 times the size of the Missoula flood, carving out great big canyons in the mountain ranges, and then also leaving ripple marks the size of mountain ridges. And as that water drained. So we see that. Go to Wave Rock in Australia. Imagine the water rolling down that, and that's 7 miles wide. And you say, whoa, there was a lot of water. Today it's bone dry. So the earth had a lot more water on it at one time that catastrophically drained. Okay, so the point here is the time, the millions of years, is not the hero of the plot. It's the conditions. then looking at it in two lenses, a lot of water in a very short period of time, one way to look at it, or millions of years with a little bit of water. And I think the lot of water fits the evidence a whole lot better than the other model. Okay, now Darwin sailed around the coast of South America, all right, on the ship called the Beagle. And one of the things he noticed was volcanic lava deposits and volcanic ash deposits. And he said, oh, wow, it must have taken eons of time to make those deposits. Answer, no, they didn't. In fact, we saw the same things happening in a few days at Mount St. Helens. And so, but he also sailed up a river called the Santa Cruz River off the coast of Argentina. They took a smaller boat, went up, and he looked at this volcanic dark bluff across the way, and he said, wow, it must have taken eons of time for that river to carve out through that volcanic basalt. That's what he reasoned. Then he applied his ideas of all those eons of time, we can call them millions of years, to his idea of evolution. Slow and gradual, small changes over long periods of time, giving you great amounts of evolution. The problem is the volcanic layers didn't take long, but neither did that river channel. You know, Darwin missed a couple of things. He didn't notice the big boulders on top of this ridge right here. Big water-worn boulders. That means there was a break of a huge dam upriver and deposited those boulders up here. But then he didn't notice these boulders down here either. And when I see boulders, I think of catastrophic flooding. Okay. And that's what you see along that section. They now realize there was a catastrophic break of a lake dam up above. And so it didn't take eons of time. You could have gotten this entire channel carved days. That's all it would take. Okay, I go to different places like Colorado National Monument. Oh, by the way, we do have a an app that you can actually download onto your phone. And even though we love to take you, each one of you that are listening, and others, we'd love to take on a tour of the Colorado National Monument and show you evidence of the flood. We'd love to do that. But you can do it from your home if you want to just download our very, very comprehensive app that a park official said is better than anything we have at the national parks. And so it's a really extensive thing to learn about the geology and the biology, et cetera, of the thing. It's so you email me, Dave Nutting at discovercreation.org, and I can send you a contact, some way to get a hold of that app. Okay, be glad to supply that for you. You go not too far from Grand Junction, another place we like to take tour groups to, and we see evidence of catastrophic flooding clear across this whole area. The thing about it is it's big. It's 18 miles from where we are standing to the bluffs on the other side. So we're looking at a huge amount of water carving out channels in a very short period of time. That fits the flood. Okay, I see flood all over. The deposition of the layers, the erosion of those layers, etc. But the standard interpretation, it takes millions of years of gradual erosion. And that's what you're going to be taught in school. That's what the students hear day after day if they're into some kind of an earth geology class. But that's because they're given a specific lens to view the data through. If they could allow idea of a flood, you understand you don't need those millions of years at all. And in fact, you can better explain what you see with a geologic model based on a short break in time. Like, suppose there was a huge lake upriver from the Grand Canyon. And there's evidences of shorelines around here too. There's evidence of clay lake bottom deposits in the Grand Junction area. What if that catastrophically drained? Then it has enough force to cut through a mountain upwarp. Usually rivers go around it, but this one blasted its way right through here and then formed the Grand Canyon below. And that's what it looks like to me. Now, we also have the possibility as the mountains are rising up, the valley sinking down, that the water is washing off in great big sheet wash. As it channelizes, it can form the Grand Canyon too. So there's two different models that fit very nicely with the flood. And so you might call this uh, Grand Lake or Hopi Lake, and some people used to call it Grand Lake. They've got another name for it now, but the Hopi Lake, there's evidences of the shoreline right all the way through this region as well. Two lakes bursting and going down, forming the Grand Canyon. And then when I see it even more, I see another lake upriver into Wyoming collapsing, coming right down, taking this one with it, barreling into this one, then overtopping here and forming the Grand Canyon, just like that. And so, yeah, I can't prove it. I wasn't there. I didn't see it, but there are a lot of rangers starting to see that. By the way, those big boulder piles indicating high velocity, fast flow are right downriver from the Grand Canyon, the ones that I showed you earlier in this program. So we're looking at the Grand Canyon being formed possibly in weeks, not millions and millions of years. All right. Here's another canyon, Black Canyon of the Gunnison. It's on a very short way, a distance from our office, actually. It'll take you an hour to get there, maybe an hour and a half. But notice that great big canyon. If you were to jump down into that canyon, it's 1,600 feet from the rim to the bottom. Now, did that little river carve this big canyon? No, it looks like this is some kind of a tear in the earth crust. I I call it a tear fault. And here it goes. How long does it take to make a canyon with a big earthquake? Big earthquake. Canyon's formed. Okay, now you just clean it out. So it doesn't take long. And I had geologists take me to task on that concept and said, I think you're right. Okay. And, but anyhow, let's go to the Sierra Nevada mountains in California. Now we're jumping over a lot of places. That means we see evidence of this flood in many, many places around the country and around the world. And so Sierra Nevada mountains, beautiful spot, but look at these lava fields up front. But if you look closely, you see a little bit what looks like an island across the way. And when you look a little closer, sure enough, it looks like water flow. So you hike down below the rim of this and you find out, well, there's a little bit of water down there, but you look at the rocks and you find out they are water sculpted. That means what? There's a lot more water going through there at one time. Okay, again, one more catastrophic flow there. If you have a lake breaking, at first it's nice clear water, but it picks up sand and gravel and big boulders, bigger rocks, and pretty soon you have a cement slurry traveling at 50, 60, 70 miles per hour going downstream, and that concrete has got to stop someplace. And sure enough, we see one of those spots, Death Valley, California, and that is petrified concrete. It's natural concrete. And you say, how did that happen? Well, it's right there in the same exact vicinity. They have a spot they actually call Mosaic Canyon in the Death Valley. And that's the lowest point in the United States. But it looks like something carved out that canyon and then coated the canyon with the cement as it went through. That's what gives you the mosaic look. So that dump is ready to carve out a canyon, but then it gets stopped. and you see at the end of that canyon the concrete dump over there. Again, this is catastrophic drainage of ancient lakes. So you can see how I can talk about catastrophic canyon formation, catastrophic layer deposition. But we have geologists all the time say, oh, no, 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 no. Those layers have been shown to be millions and millions of years old. And they've been dated by radioactive decay dating methods, which are extremely accurate. My question is, how do you know they're accurate? You're always using them to date rocks of unknown age. And that might be something you could ask your teachers sometimes if you're in a classroom. Unknown age. The only way to tell if these methods are accurate is to date something of known age and see how close you come. And that's been done. Mount St. Helens, remember, erupted in 1980. Since that time, 30 years later, they had a volcanic dome built up within that volcanic lava dome or field there. And wait a minute, they decided to date the rocks of the volcanic lava dome inside the crater of Mount St. Helens. So they should get about 30 years. Nope. The dates they got were all the way from 2.8 million years down to 340,000 years, nothing less. So I say something's wrong with that dating method. Same thing happened in New Zealand as well. And then we find out recent flows in Hawaii that they dated that volcanic material after it hardened, and they got dates of 3 million to 1 billion years old. Something's wrong, drastically wrong. I was at the Grand Canyon at one time there talking to the ranger, and he said, oh, it took millions of years to carve those layers. And the layers are almost about 2 billion years old. Oh, really? Then how come when you date the volcanic lava flow that flowed down into the canyon, you end up with dates at least as old and up to twice as old as these rock layers underneath the entire canyon? He said, no way. Your data's got to be wrong. I said, well, think about it. I'll be back. And a year later, I saw the same ranger, and he said, oh, yeah, you were right. He said, why is he giving the same ranger talk? He said, well, there's a good answer. It has been shown that these methods are not accurate on recent events, such as this recent volcanic lava flow. Well, wait a minute. My question to him would be, if these methods are not accurate on rocks of known age, how do you rely on the same methods to give you accurate results on rocks of unknown age? Good question, isn't it? And so we see evidence of major catastrophic flooding all the way through. Anyhow, so what do we see? Evidence of the flood, rapid erosion. Layers must have been put down fairly rapidly too. We see mass burial. For instance, when a clam dies, the shell's open. These are all closed. What does that tell me? They were buried and buried very deeply in a mass burial event. They didn't have time to dig their way out like normal clams would do. All right, so whole clams indicate catastrophe. Mass burial, flood. In the Grand Canyon, you find a mass burial of these particular nautiloids. You might have seen the coil ammonites. This is a straight one of those, but you find literally millions of these things, and they're all over the Grand Canyon in that specific layer, and they're pointed in the same direction. And what does that indicate if they're pointed in the same direction? They were sorted by water currents. Again, another evidence of catastrophic water flow. And nice if we could take you on a tour of the Grand Canyon, but there's a great book that's available, a guidebook from a creationist, and you can call us at AOI and we can get that to you. A guidebook to the Grand Canyon, guidebook to Bryce guidebook, the Yellowstone National Park. Okay. You go to Kemmerer, Wyoming, what do you find? Mass burial of fossil fish. Look at that. In one slab, 360 fish on it, not a fin out of place. Little fish, big fish. They even have palm fronds with fish. That palm frond is about 10 feet long. And then not one iota of decay. A little fish would have decayed, but we're seeing them whole, like they were buried. Very rapid. And you say, how rapid was the burial? That guy is eating his lunch when both of them got trapped. Rapid burial. And that's what it kind of says in Second Peter, doesn't it? Sudden destruction was upon them. All right. Mass burial, Dinosaur National Park. You find all these dinosaur bones representing about 92 dinosaurs, totally ripped up and then deposited. Totally ripped up, deposited. Mass burial of dinosaur bones. You know, it takes quite a current and a flood to tear apart a 70-ton dinosaur. But that happened. That indicated mass burial, indicating a flood. Okay, so you see why I have different view. And when I look at rock layers, I do get hungry. And the reason, I think of rock layers as pancakes. One layer of pancake stacked on top of another one, stacked on top of another one. I can imagine the butter, the syrup on it, the blueberries in it, all that kind of good stuff. But now think about that stack of pancakes. Each pancake, one pour. Okay? Look at these layers here. Bunches and bunches of pancakes here, right? All right. And so now let's look at it a little more closely. What do you do when you find one petrified tree penetrating all the way through all of your pancake layers of rock? You realize if that tree is not decayed, which it isn't, that means it was buried very, very rapidly. And the standard geological interpretation of these layers of being millions of years could not happen because that tree would have rotted. We also see frequently when we see these catastrophic burials of trees, notice how the roots were abruptly buried or broken off. Trees don't do well without roots. And so at that point, you say, something ripped it up, deposited it in the mud as all the different types of layers started being put down very rapidly. That's what we see. Now let's see where you see it. You go to the eastern United States and you see these pancake layers here. But look at the petrified tree going through all of those layers, all the pancakes. Here's another one over here, another one over here. Again, catastrophic burial. Now, so when you see one tree like that, that should wipe out millions and millions of years of geologic history. Now let's go to another spot here. And you see even in Australia, New Zealand, you go to Nova Scotia, Germany, and Russia, you find more of these trees buried very rapidly in those sediments, indicating rapid burial, flood. All right, floodwaters work fine. Now let's go to another spot, Kodachrome Basin in Utah. And there you find the one rock pipe of sandstone coming up, pushing its way through all of those supposedly 30 million years of geologic history. How did that happen? That means the layer in the bottom had to have been soft for all those millions of years. And the layers on top had to have been penetrated very rapidly. That doesn't fit with slow and gradual geology. It fits with catastrophic flooding, hydraulic events. Push something in here, boom, things come up over here. And basically, Kodachrome Basin. You see one of them in the far distance, like sticking up like a finger over there. And then you find the one next to that van, and you find out another sandstone pipe. And another spot, I see one of these pipes coming up like toothpaste out of a toothpaste tube. And again, how do you get that? Soil slowly and gradually over millions of years. This all tells me there's a catastrophic nature of the geologic record. And not only you have a couple of these, you have 165 of these features in Kodachrome Basin in Utah. All right, that to me indicates catastrophic geologic activity during the time of the flood. And think about it. You could have currents 150 miles per hour, 1,000 feet deep. Any mountain that was in its way, it's going to be washed to powder and then redistributed with those kind of worldwide currents. And so we see it. And so you might see where they planed off the mountain. Well, we do. Worldwide, you see what's called the Great Unconformity. In this particular spot, it's right near Colorado Springs, and you see the Pikes Peak granite totally planed off, and then sandstone later put on top of it. And that's called the Sawatch sandstone on top of the Pikes Peak granite. But that worldwide unconformity you see all over. You also see the same unconformity in the Grand Canyon. But interestingly enough, you have another sandstone there, but it's equivalent or the same pancake pour as what you find at Colorado Springs. So near the bottom of the Grand Canyon, just before you get into the inner gorge, you find the top heat sandstone. And there you see evidence of water cutting it off, depositing the sandstone, but it's carrying massive boulders in it. And when that happens, you see, catastrophic planing. That boulder, by the way, came from a rock layer below where you're standing there. So there was high velocity current with water tornadoes plucking material up, carrying it along, dropping the boulders when it got a little bit calmer. And that's what we see. And think about the top heat sandstone. We see it in Colorado Springs. We see it at the Grand Canyon, but you see it in all of that light colored stuff all the way to the eastern seaboard, all the way north across the Beartooth Range, across the Grand Tetons, where you see it at the top of one of the great big peaks on the Grand Tetons. But you also find the same pancake layer going north of Greenland. Wow. That's some kind of a large pancake, isn't it? You find massive limestones the same way, but it's the same limestone, just different names in different parts of the country. Same pancake. All right. So I look at another one called the Niobrara Formation. You find that just outside of Colorado Springs too. There it's standing on end, layer after layer, standing on end. And that's because of the uplift of the Pikes Peak region. And when that happened, it pulled the layers up. You go over across to Colorado Springs, just a few miles, and that layer now, instead of being on end, flattens out and goes clear across the United States. Goes clear across, doesn't stop at the Atlantic. Then you find it in England. It's called the White Cliffs of Dover. You find it in Israel and in Spain. Some now say even in Australia. That's a monster pancake pour or series of pancake pours. Again, evidence of a worldwide flood, not something general, not something local whatsoever. So I'm going to say the most documented, or one of the most documented biblical events, 3 chapters devoted to it, is supported by much archaeological evidence and much geologic evidence worldwide. And so I look at that and ask that question. Noah's flood, is it fiction or reality? I say it's reality, and we better take it seriously. But we don't hear this stuff in school. And that's why this crash class, right? And that's why we were here with that, because we understand that the reliability of the Bible is being, you might say, dashed to pieces by professors holding to naturalism, holding to anti-God philosophies, teaching their students those anti-God philosophies. And when we look at that, we say, wait a minute, wait a minute, there's evidence that what they're teaching isn't right. There is evidence that the global flood in Noah's day was a reality. And if that is a reality, we better take the message of Jesus Christ dying on the cross. Remember, Jesus believed in the flood too. Read about the flood again in Peter and some of the other chapters as well. And so you see, it's reality, and people saw that. But we also see, along with all of this, God's grace in all of these particular things. Okay? We see God's grace. That's what it says in the Bible about Noah found favor or grace in the eyes of the Lord. Some people think that grace is only New Testament. No, it's even there at the flood. The ark was given as protection for those who believe and to save the animals too. Noah's wife, sons, and daughters got to go on board that boat. I'm sure you would not feel too good if your daughter-in-law or your daughter or your son couldn't go. I'm sure. But then God says, Noah, now is the time, come into the ark. What does that mean? God's there. God's with him at that point. And it's going to be a very hard year. Okay. Okay. And then God closes the door of the ark. You read that carefully, you find out, no, Noah didn't close it. God did. And I think he did that so Noah would not have to think about, oh, I shut out all these people. Okay. Maybe he wanted to at that time because they laughed at him for 100 years as he was building that boat. But God remembers Noah. It's what the scripture says. God remembers. And it's not, oh no, I forgot all about this Noah guy. I wonder how he's doing down there. No, the God remembers, that's kind of a watchful care connotation of that. God remembers, a watchful care. And then God's promise, sign of a rainbow. He says, I know men's hearts, wicked, yeah, but he still shows his grace toward us in that while we are yet sinners, even Jesus Christ came and died for us. That's God's grace all the way through, starting even the grace way back at the flood. So anyhow, we're not going to get into tomorrow night, but if you have questions about the Ice Age, about some of the other things, be glad to answer those. And also write me an email, discovercreation.org, if you have any questions. It's at davenutting@discovercreation.org. Make sure you get those questions. Might come on one of our Yellowstone tours. We love giving tours to Yellowstone, different parts of the country, Colorado National Monument, Arches, Canyonlands. We, as a staff, do that. So we have tours coming up, Yellowstone in 2024, one in June, probably one in August, and one in September. It's for your whole family. We really encourage you to come. Or come to our Costa Rica adventure. It's even sooner. That's February 25 through March 5. So come, write me an email and let me know of your interest if you are wanting to go on an amazing tour of any one of these spots. Okay. Good books for you, good resources. The Global Flood by Dr. John Morris. It'll show you the distribution of some of those huge pancake layers. It'll show you evidence all over of the flood. But another one called Flooded, this is a kind of a graphic looking title, but it has very easy to understand concepts in it that would show you the flood is genuine. Okay, it'll show you that. And you don't have to think it's some kind of mythology. And many of the things I talked about tonight, you could probably also find a good share of those in the book called Flooded. That's not where I got it, but others are now recognizing the same thing. Remember those guidebooks to the Grand Canyon, Yellowstone National Park, Bryce, and Zion. Those are good things, good resources for you. Or our DVD set, 12 different sessions on DVDs. Special price for you, including that full color study guide, is only $35, 75 pages. And so the whole thing is very inexpensive. Why? We want this to get out into other people's hands. You can use it in Sunday school, youth groups, home study groups, Christian schools, or homeschools. But this would be a very good package for you to help fortify yourself and your family. Last night we talked about the fossil record. Now, how would I explain the fossils? We're talking about a flood. It's going to kill all kinds of animals. They're going to be buried in the rock layers, millions and millions of them, right? All over the face of the world. And so that might be a good start for explaining the fossil record. This is one of the best books you can get on the fossil record right there. Okay, so we hope that you discover creation, but worship the Creator. Okay? And come visit us at discovercreation.org. And if you wish to donate on a regular basis to AOI or even one time, please do so. It's really helpful to our organization in Grand Junction, Colorado, who have speakers going all over this United States and different parts of the world. We also train others to teach. We're training groups. We train a group in Costa Rica and India. Lots of training that we've been doing. Well, and thank you so much. And make sure you tell others about these crash classes. And then there are going to be emails sent out where you can get the replays as
So
well.
you could send that replay on to others if you would. That would be great.
We'll allow you to do that. We want the information out there.
God bless you. Have a good evening.
God bless everybody.
Good night.
All
Good night.
right. We're
Okay.
signing out here.